key questions to ask yourselves as you go about becoming an API-led connected enterprise. Second thing is this, DevOps. So DevOps is a very interesting one that's emerging in many, many different enterprises and pockets. And so when we say DevOps, what do we mean, right? I'm going to define a few things. So first of all, what we see in general is this ability to kind of procure your stack in real time very quickly. So it's this notion of, you know what, before you used to have this traditional request tickets you had to put in, and not you used to had, you still have, request tickets for infrastructure versus more of a real-time procurement of infrastructure, right? So let's look at it this way. What does a developer do? A developer makes software. But before they do that, they need to kind of make sure they provision the environment and also deploy and ship that to production, right? So here's the thing. Who's familiar with this story? A developer asks for a VM, and they get a message saying, yep, please fill out this form. So kind of frustrating, especially if you're a developer that has an initiative that needs to be completed in 2 or 3 weeks. So how many of you in your enterprises see this situation or grappling with this situation? A lot of you. So of course, this has led to this notion of developers getting really frustrated. So I made a very highly scientific graph here, joking, not, where you have the y-axis being developer frustration, where you can see the developers really frustrated and really sad in areas where they have to go and fill out this traditional request ticket process, right? But they're pretty happy when they're actually writing code. And so what is the goal of what we see enterprises trying to do is they're trying to flatten this curve. They're trying to make sure developers are happy. They're trying to make sure developers, especially in these leading edges, are productive, right? So how many of you would agree to this, that you're trying to kind of do this at scale in your enterprise? Or it would be a great thing if you could? Quite a few of you. Great. So here's the thing. To do that, you need to take a platform-centric approach to the way you're implementing your infrastructure. It's less about thinking about traditional monolithic infrastructure or monolithic product-oriented mindsets. It's not about a product, it's about making sure you have a platform. So that's very key. And it's platform for integration, platform for APIs, platform for compute, storage, network, platform for everything. So that's very key. So imagine a platform. What would it look like? It would kind of, what does the stack look like that developers need? It looks something like this, where, when you're developing, you're going to need infrastructure, you're going to need queuing and databases and application frameworks and a connectivity platform, maybe some dev tools and maybe even some APIs, right? So imagine if you could actually take this and make it, and here's some of the vendors and some of the kind of emerging technologies we see. What if you could actually take this and make this a self-serviceable and take a platform approach to this, where you're actually going to hand it in a platter to somebody? So that, who is trying to do that, by the way? Today, who is seeing initiatives or is trying to do this in your enterprise where you're actually making this more self-serviceable? Good, like about 20%. So here's the thing, right? Imagine you could actually do this in a way that, let's say you wanted to select a few things in the platform that you were trying to do. You're trying to make your development stack, you're trying to make your application, you need a few things, right? You need this, you need that, you need MuleSoft, you need to create APIs with MuleSoft and the Anypoint platform, and then you need to kind of implement the API, and you need to use also some Java framework and some queuing technology, this and that. Imagine you could actually just ship that over into some very readily available mechanism for you to start developing really quickly. So traditionally, we would kind of have VMs procured. But now what we're seeing emerging is also this new kind of container technology that's much more application developer friendly and much more actually efficient. And so, you'll see containers and, Docker is the blue icon. How many of you have heard of Docker, things like that? Oh, wow. How many of you are actually piloting and using Docker in your enterprise? So that's funny, right? So I think this is a good leading indicator of where things are going. So this is very relevant for you folks. So, if you could do that, that's what would make developers really happy, is if you could actually now platformize your stack and provide all of this in a very easily procurable way for a developer in real time, it would actually reduce that unhappy curve I just showed you, right? So you go to that world. So, but let's not forget, again, where we're coming from and where we are. It is in this world today, still. We still have to, how many of you still need to fill out request tickets, or how many of you have developers that need to fill out request tickets still? And go through remedy and this kind of, there you go, right? So this is still happening. You'll still have to fill out this process and go through, and funny anecdote, I was meeting a friend of mine, in the Silicon Valley on Friday, And he was saying that, 5 years ago, up to 1 to 5 years ago, at least in the Silicon Valley, that is, you'd have AWS, EC2, this and that, S3, that would be the shadow IT infrastructure, right? Where developers would go swipe their credit card and start to develop stuff. That was shadow IT. But now what we're seeing is that IT is starting to take that and imbibe that into the process. And so you still need to now fill out a request ticket if you want to get an EC2 instance, which is very ironic. So now the shadow IT is actually moving up the stack to like DigitalOcean. So like DigitalOcean now is a new shadow IT of compute apparently. So there's all sorts of interesting kind of ways that you should not do this and you could do this, right? And so how do you actually work and find a good middle ground where you can enable both worlds to work, right? So you still have this infrastructure, you still have this model, and what does it look like for you to kind of do this well? Because this is how many of you see this existing in your enterprise? This picture. How many of you want to get here? Good amount, right? So some of the key things is, what are the opportunities where you can actually ask and see where your developers are actually using components that are going to be used a lot? It might be things like API designer. It might be things like API implementation. It might be things like compute, storage, things like that. So what are some of these reusable elements in the infrastructure that you can platformize? What are those candidates? And what are the roadblocks for you to get there? And then how do you make sure you're governing it right, bridging between both worlds, right? So these are some of the key things in your journey you need to take into account. And what are some of the things that are going to prohibit you from adopting a platform at scale, or a platform even in pockets? And so that's, again, I guarantee you, it's not a technology answer, it's a process answer, right? So it's all around your operating model. Okay, let's talk about the next aspect, which is very interesting, which is around teams and culture, right? So for those of you that have read, Lean Enterprise, there's a very famous sort of framework they come up with. It's called the OODA framework, the Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. Who's heard of that? A few people. So it's all about, it was pioneered by a U.S. Air Force captain, and basically it was all about understanding your enemy. It was like, okay, let's observe the enemy, understand the cultural context, understand how we think they're going to think we act, so that you can ambush them, and then you quickly go and ambush them and surprise them, and you defeat your enemy. And this led to the development of like the F-16 fighter jet and this and that. So why am I telling you this story? It's because now imagine you could actually turn this into, instead of enemies and killing enemies, it's customers delighting customers. So you're all about delighting your customer, and it's the same construct. It's all about observing, understanding who the customer is, getting into their psyche, and then acting and ambushing and delighting that customer in a way. So it's the same construct that people are applying. And so for this, we're seeing a very interesting emergence of how teams are getting formed in enterprises. Now, this is the very highly early edge, I'd say for everything I'm covering, but very early kind of edge-centric in your enterprise, where we're starting to see some teams forming that are full-stack teams. And Uri talked about this already in the morning. Full-stack teams of maybe 4 to 8 people, where you'll actually have from the UI designer all the way down to the database administrator, business logic person, all of them in a single stack, and they're all working in a very product-centric mindset. They're all working in terms of, how do I create this product? How do I then maintain this product and take responsibility for this product? So you're actually responsible for the entire life cycle of this product, where a product could be any software, a website, it could be a mobile app, it could be anything. But then, of course, we still have, this other organizational sort of construct, which is more around aligning to systems and infrastructure and to your sort of back-end constructs, right? So today, in general, this is what a construct looks like, right? We have products, it's software that are sort of, aligned in some way. And then you'll have a PMO office, then you'll have an architectural function to make sure that, you're governing standards. A PMO is governing, the pipeline of projects, making sure that there's a good business case and making sure we're keeping honest to timelines and things like that. And then you'll have the technical people below, where you'll have UI developers and core developers kind of aligned in some sort of loose way to the products, but predominantly aligned in a way that's more relevant to the back end and to the infrastructure. And then, of course, we'll see the infrastructure resources getting aligned in a much more centralized way, right? So how many of you resonate with this model today in your enterprise? Pretty much all of you. And so what we're seeing is emerging is actually certain kind of verticalization and actually an integration of these teams. What I mentioned was that full stack team. Again, very early days, emerging in pockets. This is like a true startup. This is like every single product is treated as a startup, where you'll actually have these full stack teams. You'll have this kind of like the PMO is playing less of a function in this case, actually. It's very ironic. And you know, what this yellow band is this architect function. That is key. That actually now, for those of you that are EAs, enterprise architects in the room, you know, you're gonna have to figure out how do you figure out a way to kind of work in both worlds, because that's key. And so this is a very key thing, is the redefinition of what your responsibility and the process that you as an enterprise architect are gonna need to institute to kind of accommodate for this kind of a model. Because trust me, the business is already working on this. So how many of you in lines of businesses, you know, are actually very consciously or even subconsciously actually working in a team structure like this? See, so it's already happening, and you can't avoid it, right? And so you have this world where you have this organizational construct, and you have this world where you have this organizational construct. And so some of the key questions to ask yourself is, well, where is this happening, first of all? You know, where are we seeing these trends of these full stack teams emerging? And then, you know what happens to kind of how we actually bridge between this world and that world? How do we do that? What does the process look like? What does change management look like? What does release management look like? What does the PMO process look like? How do we coexist with both sort of organizational designs? I guarantee you, none of you are gonna now call up HR and say, hey, HR, we actually now need to create our organization in terms of these full stack teams. Of course not. That is a totally unrealistic proposition that's never gonna happen ever, right? You're all in companies that are big, you're not gonna be able to do this. But the question is, this is happening, and this is happening, it's gonna be happening at scale in some certain business units, especially where you're getting into APIs and microservices. We're already seeing it in a lot of our customers. So the key is, how do you actually make this kind of bridge and not ignore it, and make sure you optimize your processes for it. So this is now the culmination of all